Hello and welcome to the viewers of this video. This is the Orange Fan here, bringing you our first entry for the franchise discussion category. Now, just as the title of this video indicates, it's about the Dragon Ball franchise, more specifically the split between Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. For those who are unfamiliar with it, I should mention that when Akira Toriyama was making the manga, the source material for the franchise, in Japan, the manga itself was always called Dragon Ball, all the way from start to finish. And in that case, that was beginning of Dragon Ball, end of Dragon Ball Z. The manga was called Dragon Ball all the way through in Japan. Now, this might confuse some people where the Dragon Ball and the Dragon Ball Z split are marked in the United States and maybe other countries. I'm not entirely too sure about that. But I do know, at least when Viz Media translated the manga into English for the United States, they had branded it as Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, like the anime. And the reason behind that was, to put simply, in the United States, the anime is more well-known than the manga. And in that case, Dragon Ball Z is especially more, I think well-known might be the best phrase, or at the very least, it's the more popular of the series. So I can understand why Viz Media did split up the manga as Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z when they translated it, and localized, I guess might be another word. But I should mention that while that was the case for the manga, even in Japan, the anime was Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z were two separate anime series, or at least they were divided that way, with the anime of Dragon Ball Z being Raditz's arrival all the way to Goku heading off to train Oob. So where did this happen? Why did the Dragon Ball Z split happen? Well, in an interview with Akira Toriyama, a snippet of it is actually included in the link that I mentioned in the description as the source of this. Akira Toriyama had mentioned to the interviewer that although he himself thought it was fine just to keep the manga as Dragon Ball, the staff of the anime, Toei Animation, that's the company who makes the anime, they had asked him for a new title because they felt the anime needed an image change. And he ended up deciding on Dragon Ball Z. His reason being that Z is the last letter of the alphabet, and he wanted that to signal that this was the end of the franchise. Of course, as we now know, Dragon Ball Z ended up lasting quite a while, and it now has a renaissance going on with Dragon Ball Super on the air as of the recording of this video. But I guess that's what we call hilarious in hindsight. Now, this is where Akira Toriyama's reasons for that and his thoughts on the matter is where the split has happened among the fandom. There are some that are cool with Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z being split up. They think it's just fine. But there are other fans that are not happy with how Toei requested the split and don't like it when people treat Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z as separate series. To give you a better idea of what I'm talking about, I've seen in the past there would be many topics or throughout the fandom, many fans would ask the question of, do you prefer Dragon Ball or do you prefer Dragon Ball Z? There would be some instances where some fans would insist, they're not separate, there's no DBZ, it's all Dragon Ball. How dare Toei Animation split it? Now, some of them don't always embellish it, but I can see where some people are like, you know what we're talking about when we say Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. And what do I think about this? The whole split between Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z? I myself don't personally have a problem with it, and I can understand why some people might take issue with the split, but at the same time, I can see why Toei Animation thought the image change was needed. To go more into detail about that, usually the complaints that I do hear about the split is because some fans feel that it's treating Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z's change as just switching of a light switch, while they point out that the series didn't just immediately go from silly and wacky to more serious, just like that. And yeah, when you do look at the classic Dragon Ball series, that is before what's considered Dragon Ball Z in the anime, yeah, it wasn't always just slapstick and, well, I don't know about slapstick actually, yeah. It wasn't always more comical or lighthearted, I guess you could say. Because, yeah, it progressed. Like, the Emperor Pilaf sub-saga was pretty silly, but, yeah, even during the Red Ribbon saga, we did have some more serious moments, like Mercenary Tao's arrival, and it was the Red Ribbon saga when we had the first instance of the Dragon Balls being used to wish someone back from the dead. And, yeah, especially King Piccolo, or Piccolo Sr., was a very serious villain compared to the adversaries that came before him. So, yeah, I can see why some fans don't like the prospect of people acting like the two are separate, because they point out that the series had progressively became more serious over time. But at the same time, I do see why the image change, I do see where Toei Animation was coming from. Now, most people will say that for the most part also, Dragon Ball easily covers what would be considered Goku's childhood, while the Dragon Ball Z portion is more Goku's adulthood. Although there are some that will pedantically point out, oh, Goku was an adult at the end of what's considered Dragon Ball or the Piccolo Jr. sub-saga, and it's okay, sure, but it was only for that part of it. But I guess if you also wanted to see why DBZ might have been started where it did, I do think a valid point is that Dragon Ball Z does mark the start of where Goku, at least when we, the audience, see Goku with his own family. Because throughout the course of the classic Dragon Ball series, as it's known, Goku is single, and he doesn't really have his own family, so to speak, yet, since he's mostly a kid and he's an adult just at the end of what's considered classic Dragon Ball. And if you go by the manga, classic Dragon Ball, or the Piccolo Jr. sub-saga, if you will, ends with Goku and Chi-Chi heading off after Goku wins the 23rd World Martial Arts Tournament, while what's considered the start of Dragon Ball Z, by that point, Goku's married. He has a son now, Gohan. And if you go by the anime for Dragon Ball, it ends with Goku and Chi-Chi getting married. So you could see that as a new beginning sort of way, and that's how I see it too. Like, that's why I get where Toei Animation was coming from. It is a new, very different part of Goku's life compared to what's come before. But also another notable reason I think the change, or I believe why Toei Animation wanted to go with the image change, and I do see where they were coming from, is with regards to, well, the big reveal of Goku's Saiyan origins. Because Raditz's arrival not only revealed the fact that Goku was actually an alien who was raised on Earth, but also the fact that it widened the scope of the franchise. Because even in the classic Dragon Ball series, now, while Piccolo ended up being of alien origin too, much like Goku, and yeah, like we said, while Goku was eventually revealed to be an alien, the scope of the franchise still remained on Earth. It was still mostly Earth-based enemies, and like we said, even though Piccolo was of alien origin, the Piccolo was pretty much raised on Earth, much like Goku was. So that's where I guess you could make that argument, was there were still adversaries and the conflicts stayed within Earth, I guess would be the best way to put it. Once Raditz came knocking, yeah, Earth was not the only part of the franchise anymore. It was widened. We now had more alien adversaries that actually were not native to Earth, and we even got to go to Planet Namek for the Frieza saga. And it did also widen the it widened the scope to the other world as well. At least even in as early as the Saiyan saga, we did get to see Goku training with King Kai, and later on in the Buu saga, we did get to meet more of the hierarchy of Otherworld, or the divine beings that govern the universe. And true enough, Dragon Ball Super had widened that scope even further as we learned about the multiverse. So I do get where Toei Animation was coming from. Like, yeah, Dragon Ball wasn't always a comedy. Didn't stay a comedy all the way until Dragon Ball Z. It did gradually build up to it. But at the same time, I do see how Raditz's arrival was such a turning point that they felt that it sort of marked a new beginning in a way. I get that. I completely get that. And I'm cool with that. And oh yeah, there's another another debate that goes between the Dragon Ball and the Dragon Ball Z split. Is usually people feel that you can start with Dragon Ball Z or Raditz's arrival without having to see the classic Dragon Ball series to know what's going on. And some people argue with that. They're not happy with that claim, because I know part of that probably helps with most people probably ended up seeing Dragon Ball as a prequel, even though Dragon Ball actually was made before what's considered Dragon Ball Z. But I do see where some people are coming from with, you don't really need to see Dragon Ball. I mean, that's not to say I would agree that you never should watch Dragon Ball. I'm definitely in favor of telling people, yeah, go ahead and see Dragon Ball. I mean, whether you start there from the beginning as Akira Toriyama did when he was creating the series, or if you do go back and see it as a prequel, as many fans of Toonami did, then yeah, I think it's definitely fun to explore it. But I also see where some people are coming from when they're like, oh yeah, you get the gist of everything quickly and then you can move on to it. It probably also helps that I know the video games don't really bother to cover the Dragon Ball portion too much. They just start you off with Dragon Ball Z. That might have also influenced it. And I know some people aren't too happy about that either. But as far as, yeah, I mean, I'm definitely in favor of people seeing Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. I definitely would suggest both of them, but yeah, I can see why some people feel that it might be better to start off with Dragon Ball Z, or feel like you get the gist of things. Like, they do explain Piccolo and Kami's connection, and they explain the Dragon Balls, so I can see that, as some people are like, but you don't understand Goku's relationship with his friends, and others say all the more incentive to look back on it look at it as if it were a prequel and see how it came to that. Man. But yeah, as you can see, it is quite the debate among the fandom, but yeah, so I definitely am okay with Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z being split. I kind of accept Dragon Ball Z or DBZ as just being a shorthand to say Saiyan Saga to Buu Saga. And I do also say classic Dragon Ball, or the classic series, to refer to the beginnings to the Piccolo saga as well, to kind of help clear up that distinction. And I guess, yes, it's a very, yeah, so hopefully that helps you to understand why this debate exists or why the split happened. I mean, if you want to just go by like Akira Toriyama did, just call the whole thing Dragon Ball, that's cool. If you want to split it in Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, I think that's cool too. I'm not gonna... however you decide to categorize the series is cool with me. All I'm asking is, let's please be civil about it. And hopefully having a better understanding of why it happened, at least helps us to communicate better, I hope. So hopefully that helps answer why this debate exists, why it was started in the first place, and how people do have very different thoughts about the split between Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. Well, that was a bit of a long topic, but yeah, there was definitely a lot to talk about. Well, that's it for today then. Take care, and until next time.